members, of course, under lockdown, and all friends and guests who have joined us here in Barbados, Caribbean, and all around the world. Welcome to another Health Talk. We just allow a few minutes, but we hope everyone has joined us on this Zoom meeting. We're going to start as usual with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you again for the privilege of looking at health, an important dimension of the gospel, and as Adventists, an important dimension of the third angel's message. Bless us in this health talk. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Now, recently I was listening to Dr. Asim Malhotra, a London consultant cardiologist, and he was looking at some data from the CDC, which I mentioned last time, that obesity and metabolic syndrome, and of course obesity and metabolic syndrome are closely related. I will explain what metabolic syndrome means in a minute. Obesity and the metabolic syndrome, they are associated with a 10-fold increase in death rate or mortality in COVID-19 infection. You heard that? Obesity is associated with a 10-fold increase in death rate. Well, obesity alone in the age group under 60 is the single biggest risk factor for mortality. Of course, before the COVID-19 era, it was already known that poor diet is responsible globally for more deaths than physical inactivity, smoking, and alcohol combined. You got that? Unhealthy diet is responsible globally for more deaths than lack of exercise, smoking, and drinking combined. As a matter of fact, specifically speaking, unhealthy eating is responsible for 11 million deaths every year globally. Let me repeat that. Unhealthy eating is responsible for 11 million deaths a year around the world. Did we hear anybody making a big cry about that? But it needs to be made a big cry about because something is becoming clear. So notice that unhealthy eating accounts for 11 million deaths a year around the world. Unhealthy diet is at the very foundation of obesity, the metabolic syndrome, diabetes type 2, high blood pressure, and fat and inflammation in the arteries, which we call atherosclerosis. And of course, coronary artery disease is caused by that, and stroke is also caused by that. So the time is right, and the time is ripe for people to be told again to change their diet, because we will come across some very shocking news soon as we continue. Now, excess body fat is known from previous studies on the flu years ago to cause a dysregulated immune system. That is, the immune system does not function optimally, and obese people are at therefore greater risk of respiratory complications, even with ordinary flu, let alone with COVID-19. And even in people who are not obese, listen carefully, even in people who are not obese, but who are eating badly, that is, they're eating ultra-processed fast foods, rich in refined processed carbohydrates and sugar and dangerous fats. Even in people who are not obese, who have normal body weight, but who are eating badly, there is the risk for increased development of chronic inflammation in the body. And such people will also be at risk for increased severity in any viral infection. So Dr. Asim Malhotra, London cardiologist, who was looking at the situation in England, made these comments, which I mentioned last week. The combination of unhealthy diet and obesity, plus the resulting chronic inflammation, which unhealthy diet and obesity would cause, means that when a viral illness like COVID-19 comes along, there is going to be a much greater risk of severity and death. Wow. Now, what we do know too is that unhealthy diet, obesity, the metabolic syndrome increases free radical damage in the body, what scientists call oxidative stress, free radicals damaging systems and cell membranes and receptor systems and proteins and enzymes. Now, the good news is that these risk factors can be markedly reduced, markedly lowered, and quite quickly too, by eliminating unhealthy dietary factors such as processed, refined carbohydrates, sugars, packaged foods, which are high in salt, unhealthy oils, and people should be encouraged to eat simple, real, natural, whole food. Look at those words. People should be encouraged to eat simple, real, whole, natural food, and not the high sugar, processed carbohydrate, packaged high sugar, high fat, dangerous fat kind of foods. Now, some interesting results were mentioned by this London cardiologist. He mentioned that statistics in England show, for example, that more than 50% of UK diet is ultra processed. You heard that? Well, that's the same way, it's worse in America, same way here in the Caribbean, in Barbados, and most places around the world. More than 50% of food in the UK is ultra processed, not just processed, not merely processed, ultra processed. And that ultra processed food has found its way, he said, even into hospitals, so that hospital diets are unhealthy. And the doctors and nurses in the national health system, he says, partake of unhealthy diet, and they too are at risk for the same chronic inflammatory issues and chronic non-communicable diseases. It is so all around the world. Wow. Now, the Center for Disease Control weekly morbidity and mortality report, and also the USA preliminary estimates of the prevalence of selected underlying conditions in the COVID pandemic from February 12 to March 28 have confirmed what the other pieces of surveillance show, that diabetes mellitus, obesity, coronary artery disease, and hypertension are the 4 major underlying conditions, also called comorbidities, which will markedly increase a person's risk for severity, for admission to hospital, or admission to the ICU when infected with COVID. Talking about age, one expert from New Zealand mentioned that a lot of younger people eating badly and obese will be at greater risk than an older, healthier person. So it's not just a matter of age increasing the risk, it is something we will come across in a minute, unhealthy aging. Younger people who are obese and are eating unhealthy will be at greater risk. Now, we come to this important point. Good metabolic health is the key to having a healthy, well-regulated immune system. Good metabolic health. I'm going to come to this issue of good metabolic health and what the metabolic syndrome means in a minute. Now, a comprehensive review on metabolic syndrome in the Journal of Cardiology, Research and Practice, written in 2014, listed 4 factors for metabolic health. A person's blood sugar. Now, you know that when a fasting blood glucose is 7 or more, the diagnosis of diabetes mellitus is made. If 2 hours after a standard glucose drink, the blood glucose is 11.1 millimoles or more, the diagnosis of diabetes is also made. So that's diabetes. But there are people who will be walking around with blood sugars not yet at the diabetic level, but not perfectly normal. For example, if your fasting blood sugar is not less than 5.6, it is not perfectly normal. It is not diabetic yet until it reaches 7. But suppose it is 6, that is called impaired fasting glucose and is a pre-diabetic condition. Similarly, if after a glucose drink, your glucose is not yet 11.1, so you're not yet diabetic, but it is not 7.8 or less, it means it is between 7.8 and 11. That is called impaired glucose tolerance. That is also a pre-diabetic condition. And a lot of people are walking around with fasting blood sugars and blood sugars after a meal, 2 hours after a meal, that are not right. They're not yet diabetic, but those blood sugars are not right. And those conditions are called pre-diabetes conditions. And those conditions also lead to problems, as we will explain soon from now. So the comprehensive review on metabolic syndrome, the Journal of Cardiology USA, mentioned 4 factors that determine what we call metabolic syndrome: a blood sugar that is not perfect, though not yet diabetic. Second one, having on more fat than you should, as best indicated by a waist circumference that is not right. Too much fat around the waist indicates visceral or abdominal obesity, and that is very dangerous. The third factor to notice was a blood pressure that may be called all right, even by your doctor, but it is not all right because the perfect blood pressure is down there by 110/70 for healthy adults under 65. And a lot of people walk around with blood pressures of 138/86 and may be called all right. The research has shown clearly that it is not all right. And these blood pressures that are not ideal, but not yet at the point of 140/90, which would be labeled hypertension, these are pre-hypertensive blood pressure readings, also cause trouble. And then certain fats in the blood, too much of a fat called triglyceride in the blood, and if your good cholesterol, the HDL cholesterol, is too low. All of these are factors which describe and define a condition called metabolic syndrome. Blood sugars not quite right, though not yet diabetic. Too much fat on. Blood pressures not perfect, though not yet labeled hypertensive. Too much triglyceride in the blood, and the good cholesterol too low. We want the good cholesterol, HDL, high density lipoprotein cholesterol, to be above, let's say 1.5 millimoles per liter. If that is too low, that puts you at risk. Now the metabolic syndrome then, remember what we're talking about: a blood sugar that is inching up, fat piling on, a blood pressure inching up, and triglycerides in the blood also inching up, and the good cholesterol, HDL, inching down. Those factors together are what we use to define a term called metabolic syndrome. The metabolism is not working right. And the hallmark there you see is piling on weight, and it has to do with unhealthy eating, consuming too much of carbohydrate and sugar, and too little of vegetables, and in fact, using a lot of refined processed carbohydrate, white flour, and sugar, and sugary drinks, and eating too much. Consuming too much carbohydrate, and too much of the wrong kind of carbohydrate. That is what we're talking about. Now, any of those 4 factors I just mentioned in the metabolic syndrome: a blood sugar that is inching up, though not yet diabetic; a blood pressure that is inching up, though not yet labeled hypertensive; fat that is piling on, especially around the middle; and triglyceride fat levels inching up, and the good cholesterol dropping. Any of these 4 factors can impact negatively on health and on the immune system. But when all 4 together are impacting, well, there can be a substantially increased risk of severe illness and mortality in COVID-19 or any viral disease for that matter. Now, one common denominator in the metabolic syndrome and in obesity is this: insulin resistance. What do we mean by insulin resistance? It means that the hormone insulin produced by your pancreas, the beta islet cells, which is a very important hormone without which you can't live. That hormone is the hormone responsible for enabling sugar to be transported from your blood into your cells to be used. And when that hormone insulin can't get its job done properly, the term is used in medicine as insulin resistance. You're resisting or opposing the function of your insulin, making it hard for insulin to get its work done. Wow, insulin resistance. So people with the metabolic syndrome have increased insulin resistance. People who are obese have increased insulin resistance. And increased insulin resistance will lead on, ultimately, to diabetes mellitus, because it means that since the chemistry, the biochemistry, is opposing the work of insulin, the pancreas, the beta islet cells, have to produce more insulin to get the work that a lesser amount would have gotten done if the person wasn't resistant to the insulin. This means eventually the pancreas, the beta islet cells will begin to worn out. But more importantly, to produce so much insulin to get the job done, because you have insulin resistance, and insulin resistance comes because of a poor diet, fundamentally, and a lot of refined processed carbohydrates, a lot of white flour, a lot of sugar. This means something very important. Insulin is a fat-promoting hormone, and insulin is a salt-retaining hormone. We didn't know much about that until recently. So when you have excess insulin, certain transport mechanisms in the renal tubules for getting rid of salt are interfered with, so you hold back more salt than you should in your body. You pile on with it because insulin promotes fat accumulation in the body. Once you have higher than normal insulin levels, and this is what is happening in the phenomenon called insulin resistance in the metabolic syndrome, on the way ultimately to a breakdown of the system in diabetes mellitus. So very important then, this metabolic syndrome, putting on too much fat around the middle, blood sugar is inching up, blood pressure is inching up, and certain fats in the blood going up, the triglycerides, and the good cholesterol coming down. This group of factors is called the metabolic syndrome, and it leads on to obesity, diabetes type 2, hypertension, coronary artery disease. Now, some interesting research. There's a study in America, 2009, 2016 study looking at factors in that period of time. It is called the prevalence of optimal metabolic health in American adults. The prevalence of good, optimal metabolic health in American adults. A nation health and nutrition examination during the years 2009 to 2016. Listen to the results from that survey in America. Only 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy. Put another way, 88% of American adults are metabolically unhealthy. No wonder we see COVID-19 rampaging in the USA in terms of severity and mortality. Other places as well. Here in the Caribbean, our metabolic health is not going to be any better. The State of the Nation research and the chronic disease research had shown for years now that in Barbados, for example, our intake of fruit and vegetable is not where it should be. We still consume too much sugar, too much flour, too much refined processed carbohydrate. Obesity is on the increase, and therefore our picture here in the Caribbean is no better than the USA and Western European picture. So only 12% of American adults are metabolically healthy, according to that study done during 2009 to 2016. And when they broke down the age groups, this is what they found. In the age group 20 to 39, young adults, 20 to 39, less than a quarter were metabolically healthy, 23.3%. Only 23.3% of young adults between 20 and 39 were metabolically healthy. In other words, there's a lot of poor eating and bad eating and obesity in young adults. In the age group 40 to 59, only 9% who are metabolically healthy. Whoa. And over 60, only 2.1%. And this is why the age factor seems to be coming in. People who are older seem to be, are getting more severe illness. And as one researcher says, it isn't merely age, it is that in America, people over 60, only 2.1% were metabolically healthy. Wow. In other words, 98% of Americans over 60 are metabolically unhealthy. Wow. And then another study, a longitudinal multi-omics study of host microbe dynamics in prediabetes. Don't mind all the fancy language there, that's how the journal is written. It was an article published in the journal Nature in 2019, and it showed that prediabetes, blood sugars inching up and fat piling on, prediabetes and insulin resistance impairs the immune system, and certain signaling in the immune system, for example, interferon signaling. Interferon is a very important molecule for helping us to fight off viruses. Interferon signaling was impaired, and certain cytokine signaling pathways were impaired in obesity, prediabetes, and in the metabolic syndrome. We've heard about the cytokine storm, which some experts consider, a few experts consider controversial, but whatever the idea is on that, in COVID-19 as well as in ordinary flu, people can get into serious respiratory disorders and complications. Don't forget that ordinary flu, for example, in 2017 in America, ordinary flu killed about 60,000 people. So whether you're dealing with COVID-19 or ordinary flu, if you're not metabolically healthy, if the sugars, your blood sugars are inching up, you have piled on fat, your blood fat levels are not where they should be, and your blood pressure is inching up, and there is insulin resistance, then you're going to be more prone to all of the chronic non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, heart attack, and stroke, and you're going to be more prone to develop severe complications from any virus infection, not alone COVID-19, any of them, including, of course, COVID-19. So research has shown clearly that obesity is associated with impaired immune response. And this brings us to a very crucial point. Obesity, one study showed, this is a study a few years ago, showed that obesity is associated with an impaired immune response to influenza vaccination in humans. In other words, we are talking about a vaccine, we want a vaccine, but listen to this result. Even if there's a vaccine, as there is against the ordinary flu, a person who has metabolic syndrome, who is not physically fit, who is not metabolically healthy, who is obese, whose blood sugars are inching up, that person's ability to respond to the flu vaccine and to make antibodies to protect him or her will be impaired. So in other words, a vaccine isn't going to work that good if your metabolic health is not right. Whoa. So the answer is pointing more and more to eating healthy and keeping physically fit, keeping the blood sugars where they should be, keeping the blood fats where they should be, keeping the blood pressure where it should be, keeping your body weight where it should be by eating healthy, which is avoiding sugar and avoiding the refined, processed carbohydrates, and eating a lot more vegetables, green leafy vegetables and fruit, and whole grains, which are rich in fiber, minerals, and antioxidants. And if you're eating carbohydrates, let them be the good natural carbohydrates, but not in excess. In other words, whatever the carbohydrate, let it be minimum to moderate. And certainly when it comes to the refined, ultra-processed carbohydrates, avoid them altogether. All the various packaged foods, fast foods and junk foods in packaged containers, high dangerous fat, high salt, refined processed carbohydrates, they create chronic inflammation in our bodies, predispose us to the chronic non-communicable diseases, and increase the severity, morbidity, and mortality with any virus infection, flu, or even COVID, and especially COVID-19. One study, for example, obesity and COVID-19 severity in a designated hospital in Shenzhen, China. This was reported in the Lancet, that reputable British journal, and it showed that obesity increased the risk of pneumonia in COVID-19 patients by 3.5 times over non-obese patients. And of 393 patients needing hospital and ICU treatment, 43% were obese. So you see the link there. Now, 70% of adults in America, 70% of adults in America are obese. 70%. The Caribbean is not far behind. The last check, we were about 65%. And remember, every extra kilogram of fat in men increases the risk times 2 for diabetes, and every extra kilogram of fat in a woman increases the risk times 4 for diabetes. And an interesting piece of research here, when people are accumulating fat, fat accumulates in the liver, fat accumulates in the pancreas. This was shown by the Newcastle upon Tyne study on diabetes reversal. And it means then that with sugar accumulating in the liver and the pancreas, ultimately diabetes type 2 will develop. But research is now showing that fat also accumulates not only around and in the other visceral organs inside the belly, but fat also accumulates in the tongue. And this explains why obese people are more prone to sleep apnea, because the fattier the tongue is, the more likely it is to obstruct when you're lying down, sleeping, and the muscles of the jaw and so on relax. As a matter of fact, it has been shown that people with sleep apnea have a 5 times increased risk of developing severity with any virus infection. So this brings us to some important points. When a person has metabolic syndrome, sugar is inching up, too much fat on, blood pressure is inching up, and triglycerides as a fat increasing, and the good cholesterol dropping. When this is happening and a person is piling on weight, or even if a person is not fat but is eating badly, too much processed carbohydrate, too much sugar, and not eating enough green leafy vegetables and whole grains and fruits and so on, and getting more protein from lentils and peas and beans or whatever, a good healthy protein source. When people are overdoing the carbohydrates and the fast foods and the ultra processed carbohydrates, as the London consultant cardiologist calls it, then there is increased amount of free radical damage in the body. Free radical damage, free radicals are molecules like the reactive oxygen species they usually call, that go around the body. They're produced by metabolism and by these unhealthy foods which our metabolism would have to deal with. And these free radicals damage proteins, receptor mechanisms, cell membranes, and so on, and create inflammation in the body. So that if a virus comes along, then your immune system cannot respond properly, and then there is going to be an overreaction of one particular arm of the immune system, which I'll just stress in a minute. Now, if there are a lot of free radicals in your body from obesity and a poor diet, and there's chronic inflammation, it means during a COVID-19 infection, then in the presence of these already existing free radicals and chronic inflammation because of a poor diet, obesity or diabetes or the metabolic syndrome, the person may not yet be diabetic or hypertensive, but maybe in the metabolic syndrome, blood sugars inching up, blood pressures inching up, too much fat, and the disturbance in the blood lipid, blood fat levels, then that person is going to be having too many free radical reactions, too much chronic inflammation. The immune system is going to be impaired, and then not only impaired, but dysregulated, not acting in a balanced way. For example, one study showed that T cell function, the T cells, which are very important cells for attacking the virus as the first line of defense, T cell function improved with weight loss. That was reported in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology, that when people got rid of excess fat, their T cell function improved. In other words, therefore, piling on the fat would reduce T lymphocyte cell function and immune cell function, whereas getting rid of excess fat improves the function. It has also been shown that fasting improves immune function. Now, at church, we talk a lot about the importance of not only eating fewer calories and consuming a less carbohydrate. You need some carbohydrate, but here in the world today, people consume far too much, and far too much of the wrong ultra-processed carbohydrate and free white sugars. So research is showing that fasting improves the immune system. And as Christian believers, we usually go back to Jesus fasting 40 days and 40 nights. We usually, as the word says, and that equipped him physically and mentally for the task ahead of him of working out or redemption. Fasting improves immune function. This was reported in the American Journal of Medicine 75-1, 91 to 96. Fasting improves immune function. Consuming less carbohydrate on the whole, avoiding refined processed carbohydrate and sugars improves immune function. Getting rid of excess fat, being serious about it, and getting rid of the excess fat. And of course, remember, it is the carbohydrates that pile on the fat. If you eat nuts, for example, nuts are fatty, but this is the difference. When you eat nuts, for example, with the fat, fat does not cause your pancreas to secrete insulin. But when you eat excess carbohydrate and you're causing your pancreas to produce excess insulin, that excess insulin will cause you to get fat. So you, for example, if a person is snacking on nuts, that person will not gain weight in the same way as a person who's snacking on a sugary substance or carbohydrate. And we now come to another important point as our time comes down. Very important point. Now, we have noticed in the news about COVID-19 that they have discovered that the COVID-19 in some patients is causing a hypercoagulation state. That means excessive clotting. Coagulation is clotting, hyper is more. So some people are developing an increased tendency to clot in their blood and are forming clots. Hence, they're noticing strokes in young adults. And they're wondering about the young adults, but as we just saw, a lot of these young adults are eating badly. And therefore, they negate the youth as a protective factor. So this hypercoagulable state, hypercoagulation, in other words, an increased tendency to clot. And what they've noticed is that when they check for a test called the D-dimer, they find that the D-dimer levels are markedly increased. That indicates the person is having an increased clotting tendency and is about to form a clot, which can cause a stroke, for example, or cause the person to lose a foot by blocking off an artery to the feet. An increased level also of fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is a key clotting factor. And this can lead to what we call in medicine disseminated intravascular coagulation. Big words that mean there is a tendency and an actuality of clotting all through the blood vessels throughout the body. Whoa! Imagine clots forming in all of the blood vessels throughout the body, disseminated clotting in all the blood vessels, disseminated intravascular coagulation called DIC. They've been noticing this condition. And what they're saying is that this increased tendency to clot in COVID-19 has to do with too many free radicals, the chronic inflammation from bad eating, obesity, and so on, and also certain cytokines which are triggered by the immune response are out of order and overexplode. And there's the release of other factors. One researcher noticed that there was the release of a factor called the von Willebrand factor from the endothelium. The endothelium is the inner lining of the arteries. And that inner lining of the arteries has ACE2 receptors, the ACE2 protein, which is the receptor for the COVID-19. And when the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus binds to the ACE2 protein as its receptor, it will dysregulate a certain balance because ACE2 helps to convert angiotensin 2 to angiotensin 1 and 7, and they are protective. If the ACE2 is knocked out, you're going to have increased inflammation, poor signaling in the immune system, immune dysregulation. Your T cells are not going to be able to attack the virus, and yet the cytokine response is going to be out of order. And all of this is important, and it brings us now to some important points. And these important points are this: we stress in our health message, new start, nutrition being of the greatest importance. Most people, for example, in the United States of America and in UK, the two countries that we look a lot to for studies and so on, most people eat badly and the diets are poor. Good diets are available. Those countries produce fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and nuts, but people choose to avoid what is real, natural, simple, good, whole food, to eat junk and fast foods and packaged stuff and ultra-processed foods, which are dangerous. So we need to encourage people to eat simple, natural, real, wholesome food. And even if you're eating the carbohydrates, don't overdo, even with the good carbohydrates. The good carbohydrates, sweet potato and yam and dasheen and edo, breadfruit, good carbohydrates, but don't overdo. And when it comes to the refined processed carbohydrates, say no. When it comes to sugar, say absolutely no. And eat more green leafy vegetables. Eat whole grains rather than refined grains. And do not let the fat pile on. If it is piling on, don't become discouraged, don't panic, don't lose self-esteem. Just cut out the sugars and cut the carbs right down and use your nuts and lentils and your green leafy vegetables and do some exercise and get that fat coming down progressively. It will come down and there will be a vast improvement in your metabolic health, your overall health, and your immune function against any virus infection. And when we are eating healthy and eating more of the green leafy vegetables and herbs, things like turmeric, for example, turmeric and ginger, cayenne, garlic, cinnamon, moringa, green leafy vegetables like broccoli, kale, watercress, all the green leafy vegetables, spinach, even the super greens like moringa and chlorella and spirulina, all of those green leafy vegetables are packed with antioxidants, packed with essentials, vitamins, and minerals, which give us, through our diet, those protective nutrients, which are not found in ultra-processed, packaged junk foods that the vast majority of human beings in America and the world are eating, and this virus has caught them all with their pants down. So as one researcher said, this virus is showing that people who have been going along ignoring instruction to eat healthy have now been exposed by a virus. And remember what I said earlier on, research shows that 11, this is apart from COVID, this is before COVID-19, 11 million deaths a year occur globally because of unhealthy eating, and nobody was alarmed. But that 11 million deaths a year attributed to unhealthy eating is now showing us something. People who are eating unhealthily and building up obesity and their blood sugar is moving up and so on, these are the ones most at risk for severe illness, morbidity, and mortality when even the flu or COVID-19 comes a knocking. And even if a vaccine is developed, a vaccine doesn't work as well in people who are obese or pre-diabetic as it would in people who are eating healthy and keeping their body weight where it should be. So it all boils down to a healthy lifestyle and proper eating, nutrition, more vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts like walnuts, almonds, and whole grains. Leave out the refined white flour. Even avoid white rice and use the whole grain rice. Eat less starch on the whole and let it be the good starches, and avoid the ultra-processed carbohydrates and the sugars, and exercise, and try to get rid of metabolic syndrome, try to get rid of visceral fat, and eat those things which will naturally be antioxidant and naturally also help to reduce a clotting tendency. So for example, there are certain foods that help to prevent the platelets from sticking. Certain foods that help to prevent the platelets, certain cells in the blood from sticking, and that is part of the process of developing a clot. And these foods are turmeric. Use more turmeric in your cooking, or you can even use the curcumin, which is the turmeric extract. Studies have been shown that turmeric and curcumin from turmeric help to reduce platelet stickiness and reduce the tendency to clot, and are powerfully anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. Ginger, powerfully anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. Cayenne helps to prevent clotting. Vitamin E in your nuts like almonds and so on. Garlic, excellent. Slice it, let it rest, put it in your water, drink a little every morning. A powerful antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Cinnamon helps to prevent cells from sticking, reducing the tendency to clot. Anti-inflammatory. Ginkgo biloba has anti-platelet sticking properties, improves the blood flow to the brain, helps to reduce the chance of clotting. Grapeseed extract and resveratrol from red grapes. These are important things in your fruits and vegetables that help to prevent the sticking of platelets. Moringa, spirulina, chlorella, spinach, kale, broccoli, cabbage, green or purple. All of these are good foods that we need to eat a lot more of. A lot more green leafy vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts. Move away altogether from the sugars and the refined processed carbohydrates and the packaged and junk foods, which are the most that people are eating, and eat more healthy, more simple, more natural, and eat whole, real food. So we've looked at a number of areas here, and we've seen amazingly that how important diet is for keeping our immune system in good health. And remember the metabolic syndrome, remember obesity, remember diabetes type 2, remember the increased tendency to clot in the blood, and remember what the professor there in London was telling us, the cardiologist, that what this virus is showing us is that unhealthy lifestyle and bad eating has now brought us to the point where we're reaping what we have been sowing. Eating badly, creating excess free radicals and chronic inflammation in the body, and now a virus passes and exposes that and shows us that had we been eating much healthier, there will be much less morbidity and mortality. And even although there are other factors that we don't know all about, the research is pointing us to the fact that even for the future, even with other viruses, even when vaccines are developed, our surest foundation is healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, what we call as Adventists, New Start, nutrition, exercise, drink enough water, sunshine. I already spent a whole lecture on the importance of vitamin D. I'll just mention it again. Vitamin D strengthens the immune system, interacts with the ACE2 receptor, which is the one that COVID likes to bind, and helps to regulate the immune system in such a way that vitamin D is anti-inflammatory in a very profound way. And not only, as we just saw, so many Americans are metabolically unhealthy, but a lot of Americans are deficient in vitamin D3, especially Black Americans. And we see the increased morbidity and mortality in the Black Americans. So healthy eating, keeping slim and trim, understanding the principles I mentioned, vitamin D is so important, 5,000 international units a day, everybody should be taking. So important, vitamin D. And then we mentioned vitamin C. We mentioned N-acetylcysteine along with selenium to keep up the glutathione peroxidase system, which protects cells. We mentioned there are certain minerals like the same selenium, molybdenum, copper, manganese, which helps superoxide dismutase to function, to get rid of certain free radicals. And when we eat things like turmeric and ginger and a little bit of cayenne and garlic and cinnamon and fruits, green leafy vegetables, we're taking in the green vegetables, in the vegetables on the whole, whether it's marrow, cristophine, eggplant, lycopene, and tomato products, and so on. We're taking in the antioxidants and the nutrients, which are anti-inflammatory, anti-oxidative stress, which will help the immune system to function correctly. We want those T cells to be attacking the virus. We want the B cells, the B lymphocytes, to be producing antibodies. And we want, when the cytokine signaling is occurring, that it is not overexplosive, but it is just right. And all this has to do with eating right, avoiding the metabolic syndrome and the obesity, and using those articles in the diet which are simple, whole, and natural, and keeping away from the sugar, which paralyzes the white blood cells, and the refined processed carbohydrates, the junk food, the big set of white flour and sugar, things that people say taste sweet, but that is all. They kill just as sweetly, and improve our dietary intake and get rid of the obesity and be in a position that our immune system is strong, well balanced to fight and to resist. And even if there's a vaccine, to respond well to the vaccine to protect us. So nutrition, so important, and all of these pieces of research coming out from all around the world. I think our time has about gone, but I hope the information given to you will put us all in good stead to understand the importance of healthy nutrition, avoiding sugar, refined processed carbohydrates, eating more vegetables, especially vegetables and green leafy vegetables and fruits, whole grains, nuts, exercise, being serious about getting rid of excess fat, being serious about consuming less quantity of calories and a better quality of protective foods. You can eat, as we say in the Caribbean, a wash pan of greens and not put on an ounce, but a plate of starch will be piling on the calories. So we need to make these adjustments and keep fit, lose the extra weight, eat healthy, taking these things that help prevent clotting, turmeric and ginger, and these other products that I mentioned, and understand that this virus is simply exposing poor nutrition, as the expert from London, Dr. Asim Malhotra, was saying. So thank you. As we come to the end, any quick questions? Because our time is about gone. I thank all of you for joining, and I hope the information will serve us all in good stead. Any quick question in the remaining couple of minutes?
I have some questions on the chat to look at.
Questions in the chat.
And then Crony has his hand up. What was Kiva May?
At the end of your presentation, can you state how many garlic tablets you should take? Well, in terms of going natural, a clove of garlic, 1 clove, sliced up or crushed, and let stay for about 15 minutes, then put it in a glass of water. You can actually let it stay another 20 minutes or even overnight and drink some of that water first in the morning every day. If you're talking about the tablets are 1,000 milligrams, you're looking at 2 a day. Or if you're looking at the kyolic, which is the aged garlic extract, 2 to 4 a day. Thank you for that question. There are some persons who cannot use aspirin for thinning of blood. What are some good natural alternatives? I just mentioned them: curcumin from turmeric, ginger, cayenne, vitamin E, the same garlic, cinnamon, ginkgo biloba, grapeseed extract, resveratrol, moringa. Next self-lecture, I'll write it all in so you will have them as a list on the actual Zoom screen. What about honey? Is it bad or good for you? Honey, we are told, is better than sugar, but since it does contain some sugar, we should use it very carefully, but it is within the context of mixing it with garlic and other things. It has very good properties. Just don't overdo, because remember, it is still going to contain some sugar and calories, and if you're aiming to trim down your weight, just be very moderate, mild to moderate with it. So I hope those answers were satisfactory. Any other questions as we come up to time?
I think Brother Crony.
Brother Crony.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Hi, good evening, Pleasant Sabbath.
Good evening, thank you.
Yeah, just 2 quick questions on vaccinations. There's a school of thought that says that natural immunity is more potent and longer lasting than acquired immunity that would be gained from the use of a vaccine. But is that actually true? And then another question also, what exactly is meant by a booster shot or a booster vaccine? Or why is this sometimes necessary?
Well, let me deal with the last one first. For example, suppose a person had been immunized against tetanus by being given the tetanus toxoid, that is the same toxin that the tetanus bacilli produce, but modified so it is harmless and called a toxoid. That is injected, and the person's immune system make antibodies so that when the tetanus bacteria come along and start doing their thing, they can have no deleterious effect on the person. But that immunity tends to wane down in about 10 years. So every 10 years or so, you get another shot that is called a booster to keep the levels of antibodies up in case you go and step on a rusty nail and cow down and develop the tetanus infection. That is what we meant by a booster. In terms of the whole vaccination area, you know, there are all sorts of different theories. Basically, in vaccinations, you try to take some part of the virus, a protein on its surface or its actual genetic material, something like that, and you modify it so that it is relatively harmless, and you introduce it. The person still makes antibodies so that when the real thing comes along, the antibodies are there to fight. You're asking if that is going to be as good as if the person catches the particular virus and makes immunity against it. Well, it depends on the situation. In some cases, it can be equal. In some cases, it can be different. In this situation now, looking for a vaccine against COVID-19, many of the big centers, Oxford, for example, and Australia and the USA, they have many programs in the pipeline looking at the biochemistry and now getting it ready for clinical trials. We have to wait and see. But as we just saw here, even with the flu, a vaccine for the flu doesn't create the same response in unhealthy people as it creates in healthy people. So it boils down to keeping yourself and your immune system healthy by eating properly and following the lifestyle information. Well, thank you. I think our time is definitely gone. Thank you for joining. I see some friends who told me they were going to come in. Andrea Seeley, welcome. And some others from overseas and so on. I saw our nurse in England joined us. And she asked a question too, I think, but I can't remember what it was now. Thank you for joining us. And all of you who joined, I hope the information will be of benefit to us all as we look to eat healthier and understand what the metabolic syndrome is and keep our blood sugars where they should be, get rid of excess fat from around the waist, keep our blood pressures where they should be, and keep our blood fats where they should be, and try to slim down to our ideal weight and understand that these health principles which we've been talking about for years are so all important even in a virus pandemic. Thank you. May God bless you. We usually close in prayer. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the information which will be provided by the wisdom you've given to researchers and so on to find these things out. And we have had this health message for years before modern science to eat healthy, more vegetables, fruits, cut out the sugars and the processed foods and eat more naturally and simply maybe follow this plan to keep our immune systems in tip-top shape. We thank you in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Good evening. Enjoy the rest of the day's program. God bless you. Next program will be Elder Saul Leacock. Elder Saul Leacock will be on next as our last message for the day's service. Thank you all.